Welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab, and today I'm really excited to continue our interview and conversation series with guest coaches who are talking about the inner game of coaching. And today I'm really excited for this conversation. I'm talking with Coach Mike Candrea, formerly of University of Arizona softball, and several other stops along the way. So I'm really excited to have you here today, Mike, and thanks so much for being on.
Well, thanks for having me, Zach.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and I did as much homework as I could leading into this conversation. I've gotten a chance to hear some of the things that are important to you as it relates to leadership, which I'm really excited to kind of dive into and really dive into your coaching journey. But before we get there, I know that you're a few years now post retirement as a full time head coach, and last year in particular, you transitioned into this role of interim AD at U of A. So, how's that shift been for you from being a coach to a role that now supports other coaches?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting to say. I never got a chance to look at the department from a 10,000 foot view. You're always kind of in your own submarine, taking care of your own program, and so now I've had a chance to spend some time with other coaches, watch them practice, watch them compete, have some conversations, trying to mentor many of them because when I took this over, we had six new head coaches, so it was definitely a need for a voice for them to talk to and for me to kind of look at them and kind of evaluate what I see and try to help them out along the way.
I would imagine you're just an invaluable sounding board for so many of those coaches, especially ones that maybe are just starting out in their own coaching journeys. And I'm kind of curious for you now being kind of removed in the trenches, so to speak, or in the arena of coaching, and now seeing some of the challenges and things that coaches are currently facing. Are there any things that you're now seeing with maybe a different vantage point, a different perspective, or something that you're learning that maybe you didn't see as clearly when you were a head coach?
Well, the climate of college athletics has completely changed. Before I retired, I didn't have to worry about the transfer portal or NIL, and now we're getting into revenue shares. So yeah, there's a lot of different dynamics that coaches today are trying to navigate through, and we still don't know all the answers yet. But it's been quite interesting because it's just different. All I had to worry about was getting a kid to the University of Arizona, giving them a scholarship, preparing them for life after softball, and they were with me for 4 years. Never have to worry about that. Where now it seems like they're chasing the bag of money, and so it's pretty violent right now. Even if you do the right things, there's just so many opportunities for kids to cash in on their careers in college, which I wasn't used to, and so yeah, that has been very very unique for me and very challenging. And some of those questions that coaches have in that arena, I really have a hard time helping them because I never went through it. But I think at the end of the day, we all coach for the same reason, and that is the student athlete. So I always tell them if you keep the student athlete in the forefront of all of your decisions, then you're going to be okay.
You mentioned just how volatile and really uncertain that landscape now is for collegiate coaches. And, with your transition into this role now, what you kind of touched on at the beginning, but I'm curious, like, what's exciting you the most about this new challenge for you in your kind of professional career?
Well, I think my time that's available right now is very unique and different because I was a grinder, and all I thought about was getting my team prepared for the next event. And now I have some time, to kind of sit back and reflect and do some things that I want to do. I'm an avid golfer and I love playing golf, and this position now has allowed me some time to to pursue my personal goals, but to also still be involved in the department. And so it has it's been very unique for me. I probably have learned a lot, watching different coaches because I never had a chance of that. I grew up with some really good mentors, but I really didn't have a chance to actually watch them in action. Where now I'll take an afternoon and go out and watch men's basketball or watch, football practice and watch swimming and you you would be amazed what you can learn from other people because everyone does it a little bit differently. Um, and I think that's the uniqueness of coaching is blending your own skills and your own personalities into trying to improve skill set and the mentality of young people to perform at a high level.
I'm excited to unpack that more as we get into this conversation, and I think that's actually a really nice,
Mm-hmm.
segue to where I'd actually like to start is maybe kind of the origin for you as a coach. And in doing some homework, you were a collegiate baseball player. Sounds like career may have got cut a little bit short via an injury. And, I'm curious not only to maybe have you expand a little bit on that, but also what was or who was maybe that catalyst for you that helped you make that transition to coaching after being a player?
Yeah, that's a really good one because I grew up in love with the bat and ball game. So from the time I was 5 years old, that's all I thought about was playing baseball or playing sports. And I had an opportunity to pursue a career in college in baseball, and I had my whole career cut short with a Tommy John surgery. But that was before Tommy John, so they didn't call it Mike Candrea surgery. But anyway, it made me kind of rethink some things, and it was kind of scary to be honest with you, because I really didn't know what I was going to do. I started off as a business major, trying to chase the money, and then I kind of followed my passion, and my passion was always athletics, and so I went in and pursued my degree in physical education and kinesiology, and um, I was very fortunate to have to play for a guy at Central Arizona College, Kenny Richardson. And after my career got cut short there, he asked me to start coaching. So obviously, he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and so I finished my college career at ASU. And while I was doing that, I started coaching in 1976, my very first job, and we won a national championship. And so I'm thinking to myself, man, this is fun. This is easy. And
Yeah.
I did that for about 5 years. I was an assistant baseball coach. Got a chance to coach some really good guys. And in fact, Tom Pagnazzi, who was an all-star catcher for the Cardinals, was one of the last that I coached in baseball, and then I coached his wife in softball. So that was kind of unique. But I still remember the day when George Young, who was the athletic director, four-time Olympian, bronze medal winner in Mexico City, walked in the office and said, "Mike, I need your help." And I go, "What's that?" He goes, "I need you to coach the women's softball team." And I kind of looked at him with like a deer in headlights, like, "What do you mean? I don't want to coach women, and I'm a good baseball coach." And that was my goal back then, was to be a baseball coach. And so, being an assistant coach, I decided it would be a good opportunity for me to kind of find out what I could do on my own. And I took the job, and I took it for a year, and I had to go out and learn a little bit about softball because it was completely different, much quicker game, a lot more bunting. Pitching was absolutely completely different. I felt helpless sometimes because I really didn't know how to help our pitchers. So I figured, you know what, I'm going to kind of cash in on my recruiting knowledge from baseball. And I went out and recruited a pitcher because I felt like if I could get a pitcher, we could win the whole damn thing. And I did. I went out and recruited Connie Clark, who was at Greenway High School at the time, and ASU and U of A weren't recruiting her heavy. And I said all she can do is say no. And I ended up landing her, and she ended up being a Broderick Award winner at Cal State Fullerton, won a national championship. But she won two championships for me at Central Arizona, and so I always feel like I have to thank her for the start of my career. And from there, I got the job at Arizona and never looked back. I mean, it's 37, 45 years later, I'm in the softball world. And that was, right around Title IX. And so the game of softball at the collegiate level was not what you see today. It was basically a step above rec softball, summer softball. So I had the opportunity to watch this game grow from the ground up and be a part of that growth. It was interesting because when I first got into softball, it was like no one wanted to share information, and I'm going like, "Hey, gang, the game's the same. I mean, the physical skills are the same. You got to be able to throw it, and you got to be able to catch, and you got to be able to field, and you got to be able to hit. I mean, it doesn't not different than baseball. So convincing people that fast pitch softball was very similar to baseball, which is the approach that I took, kind of turned the world upside down a little bit because we're the first team to wear pants. When I went in there, yeah, everyone was wearing shorts, and so I said, you can't wear shorts and play this game. We're going to play the game aggressively, and so I put pants on them, and the next thing you know, everyone's wearing pants. But I was one of the first to really share information because I felt like I had so many good mentors in my life, and that's where I learned. My philosophy was from very different people, and I was blessed to be in baseball and be in the junior college level where there were some really great coaches back then. I mean, Gary Ward and Jim Fry and Freddie Nelson and Rich Allday, Kenny Richardson. I mean, the list went on, and Pug Marriage. And I was always a student of the game, so I was always in their back pockets trying to find out what this game was all about. And that was kind of the start of me kind of coming up with my philosophy and my approach. And then obviously it changed throughout the years because the game's changed,
Yeah.
But I still remember today when a guy came into my office after we won the championship in '91, our first championship, and that was a bunch of Arizona kids, no five-star athletes. We had good pitching, not great pitching, but we ended up beating Lisa Fernandez in the championship game, 1-0. We scored one run on one hit. They had no runs on two hits, and it was a one-game showdown back then. And I always look back and I go, God, if I had to play her the best 3 out of 5, we would have never done it, So I figured they gave me that championship to kind of get my career started. And then I fell in love with the game. I went out and watched the men's game and at the very highest level and figured out what it looks like, and I loved the speed of the game. I loved the short game, the speed. There's very little margin for error, and the game is so quick. And that kind of got me going a little bit to what do we need to do to bring this game to the next level. And Bill Hillenbrand came to my office and he goes, Mike, I want to help you. And I go, what's that? He goes, what do you have in mind? I go, well, here's this napkin that I had, and I had drawn the stadium on it. And I figured that if we could build the stadium for fast pitch softball, we could put people in the seats. So we built the very first stadium of its kind around the country for fast pitch softball. And to this day, we are still selling out because it's a great, great sport. And, that was kind of the beginning of it. And I go back and I've just been blessed by so many people that have come into my life that have kind of helped me with this journey because it is a journey. There's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of things that I would change back then. But as a young coach, you had one goal in mind, and that was pedal to the metal. Try to get 1% better every day and build a team. So there's a lot of things that changed. I mean, my early recruiting, I would go after the best skilled kid in the country, and I didn't worry about the intangibles. I didn't worry about their work ethic or whether they were a good teammate or not. And as I grew older, that changed completely because my priorities have changed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love hearing kind of that story of kind of where it all began, but also who's played a role in that. And I'm sure that was just the start of that list. You know, we like to say that success is certainly not a solo journey. And to hear you describe so many different people that not only influence you, but as a player, as a baseball coach, and then in your transition to being a softball coach is really honestly very cool. And I'm trying to think of exactly where I'd like to go with that because you kind of touched on a couple of things I was curious about of just like what kept you. At what point did you know softball was where you weren't like it was a long term thing for you,
Yeah.
where you were like, this is the space I want to continue to coach in?
Well, I think when I determined that I wanted to pursue it at the highest level at that time, and that was Division One, and so when I came to Arizona, I pretty much jumped in full board to say, you know what, I'm gonna coach softball for as long as I can. I want to make this program not just a winner, a flash in the pan, but I wanted a consistent program, that we could build, with a legacy of some good players, great players. The facility was phenomenal, and I think once we built that facility, could not look back. And I had many opportunities to leave Arizona, but never did because of I guess, the tradition that was built there. I always felt like that I was a steward of that tradition.
Yeah.
And so I never saw myself going any other place other than coaching a couple Olympic teams, which was kind of fun to be able to coach some of the people that I competed against and be on the same time on the same team.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be excited. I have a couple questions that I'll at some point ask
Yeah.
you about those experiences, and I'm curious, like obviously accomplished so much in your career, let alone not just results and titles and accolades and those types of things, but even just hearing you describe being really a pioneer for the game and what you helped played a role in building. So I'm curious though, like if we kind of strip all of that away for a moment, how would Mike Candrea describe himself as a coach? Which I'm guessing went through a bit of an evolution, but for you, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I always told people that I always use the three C's, and not because of my last name, but the very first thing is I always want to be competent. So I was a student of the game, and like I said, you know, I grew up in the baseball, and I still belong to the American Baseball Coaches Association because I love baseball coaches. I love the way they sit around in the lobby and talk the game, and I've been so blessed to be able to be in that network of people and know them to continue to learn with that regard. But I think you have to be good at what you do because I felt like the better information that I had, the better information my kids had, and I always want to try to stay, one up on everyone. And so I wouldn't say that I was innovative, but I was always trying to find better verbiage to teach the game because the game really doesn't change. But I think there's great teachers that can simplify the game. And to me, that's what baseball's all about. It's not rocket science, but it's being able to keep it simple and to a point where you can play the game unconscious. And we always talk about that. Being unconscious and competent is a big part of being able to play this game because it's a game of reaction. I always wanted to be consistent. As a person, I think that's so huge, especially coaching young women. I always felt like the people that I was going to have on my staff and surround them with had to have stability in their own life. Because if they have stability in their own life, they're going to bring that to the table every day, to work every day. And I just think young kids have enough roller coasters that they're on throughout life that they need some stability. And so consistency was a huge part for me. I wanted a kid to know what I was going to be like, whether we won by 10 runs or we lost by 10 runs. So I think that was important. And then the third thing is that I care about them as an individual. I think at the end of the day, I realized that, I used to spend all my time coaching the athlete and make them as good as I could as a softball player. But then later in my career, I realized that I was coaching the person a lot more than I was the athlete. Because once I could get the person to feel good about themselves, then the athlete can come out. But until you capture that and build that relationship, relationships are everything. And so if I describe myself, I was a servant leader that always followed its moral compass. Because I always felt as a coach, you were going to get put in a corner sometime in your career that you're going to have to make a decision that's going to have a huge effect on the future of your career. And I never wanted to disappoint any of the players that I have coached over the years. And so I'm always thinking about how would this affect the players that I coached before I made decisions. And so I'm a man of faith, and so I try to follow my moral compass as much as I could. But being a servant leader, I think I realized that, you need to have a village to be successful. And so I think if there's one thing I did really well is I made everyone feel important in our program. From from my secretary to the people that are dragging my field, they are a part of our team. And if we want a championship, they want a championship. And I think I've been very good at that. I think I'm a good relationship builder. Probably better so than being an X's and O's coach. I think I understand the game, but I think my strength was getting the most out of kids because I could build relationships, and then I could have tough discussions with them, because I was the first one in their life sometimes to tell them that, you're not the best thing since sliced bread. You're going to have to work for everything. And you think it's tough now, wait till you get into life. And so, you're always challenged as a coach to talk the talk or talk the walk. I mean, walk the talk, it's important. If I say something, they know it's going to mean something. And, I left an All-American pitcher home right before going to the College World Series because she broke one of our team rules. And that was a tough decision. But you know what? I had to make it, and I did. And we went and won it without her. And then that just shot all over the world that, you know what? You got to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, if you do the right things, then you'll never have to regret any decisions that you're making, especially when you're dealing with young people.
Yeah. One of the things that you're describing really well is the role that coaches and leaders play and really kind of being that thermostat for their team, right? Like they set the
Right.
temperature for everybody in the organization, and as you noted, not just the players, but everybody. So I'm curious though, when you reflect the mirror now towards your players and the people that you led. What did you want them to feel when it came to being led by you?
Well, I wanted them to know that they had someone that trusted in them and that was loyal to them, and that I was their father away from home. And at the end of the day, when someone says, "Hey, you're like a dad to me," that was the biggest compliment that I could ever get from a female athlete. Because I always told them, don't. I'm not here to be your friend. If you want a friend, go buy you a dog. But I want you to know that I care about you, and I care about you as much because I want to be part of your life forever. And that's one thing I realized, about dealing with the female athlete was, men have to play good to feel good, women have to feel good to play good. And so I had to spend a lot of time trying to make them feel good about themselves. And I think that's one thing that's changed more than anything is if I go back to my career, we had mental performance. The Ken Revises of the world and the mental game of baseball. I mean, all that stuff I live by. But now it's mental health because there's so many other factors in their lives. And, I look back, I grew up without a cell phone. I grew up without social media. I played without worrying about someone taking pot shots at me because we didn't have all that. We had a black and white TV with rabbit ears, and I would emulate Mickey Mantle, and that's how I learned how to play the game. Where today, these poor kids are getting, I mean, it's tough. because social media has kind of changed the way people can attack you, and they are sensitive. I mean, they're young people, and sometimes I look at our basketball players. They're 7-footers, and they look like these men, but they're really boys still. And so you have to remind yourself, that. And I think that's what really made me say, you know what, I got to spend more time on the person. I got to find out more about them. And if I can keep the way they feel about themselves in check, then it opens a lot of doors to help their skills, down the road. But if you don't do that, then I think you're kind of missing the boat because it's hard to help.
Mhm. Was there a specific moment or at any point in your career where there was that like aha moment for you where that became understood? That notion of like the caring and really like investing in the people. Was there at any point in time
Hmm.
a specific moment that really resonated with that?
Well, let me start by saying that one of the toughest parts of my job, my career, was trying to find balance in my own life. Um, I spent more time with other people's kids than my own. And you say the aha moment to me was nothing to do with the game. It was about the balance that I was missing in my life because I'd blow through all the victories. I would agonize on the defeats like we all do. But on the other hand, I forgot about the people that I truly loved, and it was my own family because I commuted from Casa Grande to Tucson for 21 years. So you can imagine that's a lot of time in the car. And I would come here early in the morning. I would leave late at night. I'd go home, eat dinner, get up, do the same thing. And I was coaching the national team in '94, getting ready for the '96 Olympic Games in Atlanta. Very first game that softball was in. And I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, and coaching the best team in the world. I just won my third national championship in Arizona, and you think that I would be on the top of the world because I was at the top of my profession at the time, but I was there for a month and I was miserable and I couldn't figure it out. Something was not quite right, and I think when I went home, my son at the time said, "Dad." He didn't say welcome home. He said, "Dad, can we talk?" And I go, "Yeah, what's wrong, Michael?" He goes, "Would you consider dropping out of the USA coaching pool so that you can watch me play baseball?" That changed my whole approach to everything that I looked at. Because I was making the game bigger than what it really was. Yeah, we all like to win. We all like to compete. But the game will never be life threatening to me. But it was life threatening to me early in my career. And after that, I realized I coached Michael for the next 3 summers. Um, had a blast. Got to coach with Clint Myers, a good friend of mine, and good baseball man, and coached his kids and my kids. And if it wasn't for Michael, I probably wouldn't have taken that opportunity. And to me, that kind of woke me up to say, you know what, Mike, you have to start. Number one, you got to start judging your success on something other than national championships, because that was my big thing. If I won a championship, then I was successful. I had a good summer. If I didn't win, I was grinding, figuring out why I didn't and what I need to do to get back there, and will I ever get back there, that type of stuff. And I think once I went through that, it made me realize, hey, take a deep breath, relax. You got to start enjoying it. You got to start enjoying the small victories. And you got to start enjoying the process. You got to start enjoying the people around you. And that kind of changed me, and it continued to change me a little bit because in 2004, I was coaching the Olympic team. And right before that, my wife had retired from work so that she could travel with me for the first time. And she we're in the last stop in Wisconsin. We're on a tour, 46 states, we were on our last stop, and she got up in the morning, went for a walk, came back, brought me breakfast, went to the airport. I always had her check in first. So she went and checked in, um, went, sat at the gate, and next thing you know, the girls are running at me and going, "Your wife's down." And Sue had died of a brain aneurysm. Perfectly healthy one moment, gone the next. That changed me. It made me really realize that I need to start enjoying every day because we're not guaranteed it. And it got me back. My faith has always been a big part of me, but truthfully, that really made me realize how important it was. That it's not whether you're going to need it or not; it's when. And the when came because I'd lost a child early in my career, 24 years old, and we always lose mom and dads. Those are a little bit different, but losing your wife and all of a sudden you're 46 years old and you don't know the color of your checkbook. You don't know what your kids need. You realize that there was a whole nother aspect that was going on to allow you to do what you did. And that influenced me, I think, the way I treated people and parents. And, I always felt like this could be the last practice I have with this kid, right? And so it definitely tempered me a little bit and made me a lot more compassionate for them as people as much as for them as athletes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's everything that you went through and you've gone through. It creates this sense of perspective and this sense of appreciation. And one thing that I've heard you talk a little bit about, which I hear, having studied under Ken Revisa,
Yeah.
he certainly has a special place in my heart, but the notion of being where your feet are.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes it can take conversations, words, or experiences to kind of pull us in. Because for so many coaches, I think what you're describing is there's always the what's next. Like you
Right.
achieve and you just get right back on, and okay, well, what's next? But like we lose sight of sometimes what is now, what is
Right.
here, if you will. How how did coaching from a space of being where your feet were towards the end of your or towards the back end of your
Hmm.
coaching career really change you or influence you?
Oh, it's I can't hardly even describe it. It's been completely different. That's one thing about retirement is I, for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking toward the next athlete or the next performance or the next game. I every day's a Saturday. I always tell people right now, every day's a Saturday. I can get up and do what I want to do and enjoy what I want to do and be able to enjoy my grandkids and my kids. I felt like I've tried to play catch up in life. Most coaches understand that. Professional coaches, especially. I've been gifted to have a chance to coach Jasmine Paris Chica. Tony's a good friend of mine, and always love sitting around talking to him. It's and um, yeah, it's a grind. And sometimes you don't realize it until it's gone. And I think that's the one thing is I'm glad I woke up and I'm glad I can still be able to savor some of the things that you work so hard for. But be where your feet are is it carries on another um, meaning for me because I always felt like there's if you could get kids to control the controllable, we always talk about that attitude, effort, and I always said focus. Because if I could get a kid to come into practice every day and be where their feet were and focus on what we're doing, it's amazing how much better they get. And that's a hard thing to do unless you do a good job of knowing the person. It's hard for them sometimes to leave their baggage outside the stadium and come in and give it everything that they have. But I think that has really helped a lot of players to understand that. You can't worry about yesterday, you can't worry about tomorrow. It's what are you doing right now? And I think that's how I live my life is I want to get the most out of every day. Where before when I was young, it was like God, I've got forever to live. Well, I'll tell you one thing, man. I'm going to turn 70 years old, and it's like, whoa. I don't feel it. I don't act it, but you know what? It's there. My dad passed away at 77. And I remember sitting at my desk one day, and I was thinking about my dad, and I pulled out this little tape measure, and I pulled out 77 inches, and then at the time I took away what I was like 60, and I'm going, that's what I got left. So sometimes a little different perspective in life can help you, I think, become even a better mentor and a better coach, because that's a big part of it. A big part of it is listening, and I don't know anyone that I can say affected or helped me that weren't good listeners. They have to put up with a lot of my BS to be able to help me, and I think that's so much right now with coaching. I mean, the game hasn't changed. It's just the the things that we've stacked on ourselves that have changed the game. You know, I always said that the mental game is kind of like having a deck of cards, and the more you play the game and the more you experience, the bigger your deck is. But on the other hand, the great thing about baseball and softball is you got to be able to get the right card to the top when you need it. So not only do you have to have a great foundation, but you have to be able to know the game well enough that you can get the right card on top of the deck. And I
Yeah.
always loved that. I mean, that's the part I loved about the game. And I go back now and I look at athletes and people go, well, who's your best here, and and I tend to look more at them as a whole, holistically. What type of athlete were they? Were they, because the one thing I learned about the Olympic team, those kids are great teammates, because you're going to have 15 kids that are all Americans and all world, and someone's going to play and someone's not going to play. But the one thing that they were is they were emotionally stable and they were great teammates. And they had great eyes, the game that we play. But you start looking at stuff like that, and that's truly what you tend to focus on with young kids. I mean, it's a very difficult game. We play a game of failure. So I thought one of the things I did well is teach kids how to fail and how to fail forward, because I was in that spot before as a coach that I would fail backwards. I would grind even more. I would work harder, not smarter, and you realize that that's not going to get you there. So I
Yeah.
I definitely enjoy life, and I look back at my career, and I just feel blessed. Number one, that I could follow my passion. I think that's the biggest thing. I could follow my passion. The bat and ball game was my passion. I've been on a baseball field or softball field my entire life. And I always say that I never have worked a day in my life because I'm doing what I love to do. So you look back at your life and you go, you're pretty blessed. You know. And then you look at your grandkids and you go, God, we got beat today, 2-1. But then you go home and you go, really? They make you forget it very quickly. So,
Yeah, they're just excited that Grandpa is home and
right.
spending and present with them.
Exactly. Because like
Yeah,
right now,
no,
I would give anything to have a conversation with my dad. My dad was completely different than me. He was a jazz musician, very good one. Died a frustrated man because he had 4 kids and none of us had any musical talent. But I used to think when I was a little kid, I used to follow him around with my little plastic lawnmower and think he was the smartest guy in the world. I got into high school, he was the dumbest guy in the world. And then as I got older, I'm going, you know what? He was pretty smart.
yeah, yeah. It comes full circle for
Sure.
sure. Yeah, I have a year and a half or 1.5 year old, so I'm gonna try
Oh,
to enjoy this time currently of him thinking I'm the greatest thing since sliced
absolutely.
bread. Because I know I've talked to enough people that they reach the teens and all of a sudden it's a little different.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Uh, one thing that I really appreciated that you hit on a few things that I really
Yeah.
appreciated, but one in particular is this notion of helping. your players fail forward. And you mentioned kind of the difference between failing backward
Mm.
versus forward. And so I would be curious though how you got not just yourself to be skilled at that, but also like your fellow staff, like as a collective coaching staff, what was it like for you all to make sure that you all failed forward too, to kind of model that for your players?
Well, I think picking your staff is probably the most important thing because everyone's going to have a finger in the recipe, right? And you want to make sure that those are the correct ones. And so, the one thing that helped me, first of all, was when I was looking for people, I'd look for people that were high energy, okay, high output, and low drama. Because I think the drama part of the game can get really overwhelming. And sometimes, young women like to create drama. And so I think that in itself kind of gets you to understand how do you handle failure. You're gonna have it. So I guarantee them that they're gonna have failure. The best hitter gets a hit 3 out of 10 times, right? So what are you gonna do when that happens? What are you gonna do when you boot a ground ball? So a lot of it is giving them things that they can do because I think it's not so much the action, but it's the response to the action. So when I went recruited, I always looked at kids that failed, and then I would look at what they did right after that. Kid that strikes out goes in the dugout, throws her helmet down, goes into the dugout and doesn't get with their teammates. That tells you something, okay? And so I'm always looking at the way they react to it. And I always say that you can respond either in a positive way or in a negative way. So I kept things very real and very simple. You got to breathe. You got to have a routine. All those things that we talk about in the mental game are really important. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes is do you have expectations that that equal the amount of work you're putting into the game? Because I think in baseball and softball, the more you put into the game, the better the game's going to treat you, right? And so I think there's times when you're failing. Are you doubting your process, or are you doubting your skill set, or are you just doubting your ability to be able to comprehend what's going on, and you don't really have a way of fixing it? And so, a lot of times the game gets quick. We all know that. How do you slow the game down? Well, every kid's different. Sometimes it could be just breathing. Sometimes it's, picking up dirt, throwing it on the ground. I mean, little things like that. I don't think there's any easy answers, but I just think that sometimes you grow in the game because you grow that database, and the more mature you are, the more you understand the game. The more you understand it's a game of failure. I think that's a big part of it. When I'm dealing with 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, they think it's going to be a perfect game, right? When I dealt with the Olympians, they knew it wasn't a perfect game. They had that stability. They didn't go get here one day and here the next, or one at bat here and here the next. They kept things pretty simple. And so everyone's different. I mean, I never used a cookie cutter approach, but I did know that the better I knew someone, the more I could help them. Are they just putting too much pressure on themselves? If they're putting pressure on themselves, why are they putting pressure on themselves? Is it internal or is it external? Is it someone else that's putting that pressure on them? Because at the end of the day, athletes are pleasers. They're going to do everything in the world to please you. You're right? And especially the female athlete, they're going to try to please you. And so that really made me think a little bit about my approach to how do we get them through these tough times. And at the end of the day, we know we're going to get through them. That's kind of part of our preparation, right? I mean, I remember having this great practice plan one time. I'm coaching the national team. We're in the Dominican Republic, and I take a lot of pride in my preparation and I pay attention to detail. I've got this great practice plan. We arrive at the field, and I said, "Where's the practice field?" And they pointed over to the right. I look over to the right, and there's grass about this high. It's a pasture, and I'm going, we're gonna have to change that. So we found two pieces of dirt that one we could throw on, one we could hit on. And then there was another dilemma. We had two donkeys in left field that we had to protect because it would cause a national incident if we hit one of them. So the Olympic experience taught me a lot about, flexibility, you know. And so there was, after that, it was always, here's plan A and here's plan B. Where early in my career, there was one plan and that was it, man. We're going to have to find a way to get it done. Well, you realize that sometimes it's not all going to work the way you plan it. And I think the same thing with the game. It doesn't always work the way you plan it. Sometimes you just got to, you got to keep grinding. If you believe in your process, and that's important, then you got to realize that you're going to have good times and the bad times. I look at the Yankees, man. I'm going, why you guys are? I look at the record today. They were like 15-10 or something like that. I'm going, Jesus, that's uncalled for. But it happens. And I think that's what baseball does for you, because you play in 162 games. It's a law of averages that you're going to have good days and bad days. Right?
No doubt. No doubt. And I think what you're raising too is a great point around, like, we tell players, it's like everything is in seasons. Life is, there's no straight lines per se. Everything's so it's like the notion that, like, success is a season, and so is failure
Yeah.
too, like struggle, right? Like, I remember we had a player a few years ago who started off the year 0 for 20 something. It was not ideal in the big leagues. And I went up to him and I said, "Listen, I'm not a stat guy. I'm not an R&D guy, but I did a little bit of a dive into the numbers." And I said, "In your professional career, do you know what percentage of hit list streaks you've broken out of?" And he was like, he kind of looked at me for a second and he was like, 100%? And I was like, yeah, every single one of them, like whatever you've
Right.
experienced, like, you've also gotten through it
Right.
too. And I think that's, it ties in so well. But in order to do that, you also have to be adaptable, as you
Absolutely.
mentioned, especially as a leadership. And that goes to, I think, that consistency piece you talked about too. But, with that, what I'd actually like to, kind of angle towards is, you mentioned at the beginning these three C's, and one of which was competence, and you talked about just being a student and learning from anything and everyone. And so I'm kind of curious for you, because you mentioned too, like, you believe in, like, the 1% better
Hmm.
mentality. Tell me a little bit about how you tried to embrace the 1% better and that growth mindset as a coach and as a leader.
Well, I think it begins with the standards that you set. And so I always had high standards, and I would never lower the standards to make them feel good or anything like that. I always kept my standards high. And I think that's the first step, you know. The other is that there's a the game's like a piece of pizza, man. There's so many different pieces that you have to put together, and so you can't master all of them all the time. But what are the things that you can control that you can get 1% better every day? Whether it's the reps that you're taking, whether it's the focus that you're on the reps, um, whether it's breathing. I mean, whatever where you're working on right now, are you really truly bought into that, and are you working on that? And so I think that's a big part of it, because it's hard for most people to um, to stick with anything. I mean, you talk about diets. I mean, people are on and off them, right? It's hard. It's hard to have that consistency. So I think one of the things I tried to bring is consistency to the game as much as I could. So every drill that we did fit into the game, but I could maybe break the game down into small parts to teach them how to execute a certain skill. Okay. But then at the end of the day, you got to all put it together. So the one thing that I did really to help that process is that we would compete every day in practice. I mean, my practice would look pretty similar to baseball. I mean, we did a lot of individual drill work at the beginning of practice. We hit every day. We did defensive work. But at the end of the day, we did some competitive piece to put the game together the way it's supposed to be played. And that was the time that you could really focus on kids, whether they're having problems in their routines, in their reactions to their negativity to something that happens in the game. And that's a great opportunity to call that out and talk about it. So I think putting them in a game mode as much as possible is a great way of helping them understand 1% better every day. Because the picture looks different from Monday to Friday. It looks different from September till May. And so that once they have gone through that process and they understand the process isn't a straight line, it's all over the place. They understand that, man, there's things that I can control that I need to be able to get 1% better at. Because I think that's kind of the way the game is. The game's a bunch of pieces that you have to put together. And sometimes it's not, you don't have your best stuff, but you still have to go out and compete. So I think competing is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And what scares me today, I mean, I love the analytics. There's a place for them. But I think sometimes people lose the sense of learning how to play the game with feel. They start looking at numbers all the time. Okay? And next thing you know, they become, I think, robots. And that's not how I was brought up to play the game, and that's not how I taught to play the game. When I first started coaching, I never showed them any stats. And I thought that was pretty cool, but, that didn't last very long because the stats are all over the newspaper and now social media. And it's how you interpret that.
I know I have had conversations with coaches about just, there's certainly value and benefits to the emphasis now when it comes to analytics and stats and the information it can provide. And there can be unintended consequences too. There can be drawbacks as well. And one that, in conversations with coaches that we've talked about is like, earlier you brought up the unconscious competence, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
being in flow, right? Like it's impossible to be in flow and analytical at the same time.
You're right.
Like those two things are so much at odds, if you will, because one is very much a thinking kind of that analytical space. The other is the instinctual, being just fully present and immersed in that competing
Mm-hmm.
and everything. So, what you're raising is very much a challenge, and again, it has value, and there are unintended consequences.
That's why I love golf. Really. I mean, you think about how you swing and try to play the game, you can't play it.
Yeah,
When you're playing at your best, you have confidence and you have trust, but you're unconscious.
yeah,
You're not thinking how you're doing that. And I think today's world, information is power, and these kids have grown up in the information age where they can get on YouTube and watch 8 million different people talk about hitting in their swings. And my thing to them was make sure you can connect the dots. Make sure you know why you do what you do. Why do you throw the way you throw? Why do you hit the way you hit? Because to me, I think that's one aspect of the game that it took me a while to learn is people do things, people use different movement patterns because of their physical deficiencies, right? I wasn't smart enough to understand that. And I want to always understand why a kid, if I ask a kid to do something and they can't do it, you know, I keep thinking, God, are you just not an athlete or what? No, it's because their body doesn't operate that way. And I find that in golf so much. I mean, upper body and lower body separation can look really good, easy, but for some people, it's not that way. It won't work.
Yeah. Yeah,
So I,
for
I
sure.
think, I think in that regard, I've grown a lot to understand why people do what they do. You know, interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think that occurs unless you coach from this space of care that you described earlier, but also that space of curiosity too,
Right.
right? And just being open-minded. And I think I like that you kind of started to talk about becoming more flexible later
Hmm.
on in your career, and that doesn't occur. Learning doesn't occur without some level of that flexibility, being open to new ideas. So, with that, I'd also be kind of curious, like, as you progressed in your coaching career, what's like a belief or a method, if you will, that you eventually had to let go of or quote unquote unlearn because you realized that, oh, maybe there was a better way and or a different way to think about this.
Ah, God, that's a good question. Probably learning to work smarter and not harder was one thing that I learned. I mean, I, I grew up in life just working hard because I always felt like I could outwork you. I may not have the same skill levels, but I'm going to outwork you. And then I realized that sometimes you spend a lot of time doing nothing because you're working hard. So it's being productive, and to me, I think that's so important, not just as a coach, but also as a person. There's only 24 hours in a day, so to be able to use those the right way, I think it does take some growing up because I was always scared that someone was going to outwork me, and then I realized that that's probably not. It's like taking 1,000 cuts, but if you're not taking 1,000 quality cuts, it's not going to help you. And yeah, I think that's a big thing. And the other thing I think that changed me was getting a common verbiage to teach the game because it's pretty interesting when you talk about baseball and you talk about different coaches use different terms that mean the same thing. So obviously, as I became more of a student of the game and I realized that this thing means the same as this, I had a better understanding on what's the most effective way for me to teach the game. And I go back to Don Slott. Don was a good friend of mine, former major leaguer, and he truly, I think, revolutionized how we teach hitting because he came up with a common language, and so if you look today, um, I think Right View Pro and the video replay has truly changed the game, especially in softball, because in softball there really wasn't a common language. More so in baseball, but I think we used to use video, but we really didn't know how to use video, if that makes sense. And I think that's one thing I've seen in the whole sport arena is that technology has allowed us to be more efficient in teaching the game. The more efficient I can be, the more improvement a kid can make, and on the other hand, too, it improves confidence because the better they get at a skill, the more confident they become. I can't sprinkle any dust on them and say you're going to be a confident player. No, the better you get at a particular skill, the more confident you become. And so people like that have kind of crossed paths with me, and Kevin Long's a good friend of mine and a very good hitting instructor in the major leagues, and you know, um, God, I always look forward to the next guy that I would meet to talk about the game. But I think Don was one that I look back at that and I'm going, that was an aha moment in my career where did I really, was I really able to connect the dots, and did I really know why I taught what I taught? I taught what I taught because of what I was taught, right? And how much of that occurs in the game? You know, I teach,
All the time.
yeah, I teach because it worked for me. And so I thought that was really, really beneficial and kind of an aha moment for me to say, you know what? There's we got to look a little deeper into this if we're going to become really good at what we do. And I wanted to be confident. I wanted to be good at what I did, and so I would always look at different ways to teach the game. You know, different verbiage. I'd go to a clinic, and you might listen to the same stuff every year, but you may get one little nugget, man, that's going, wow, that's what I'm missing.
I can use that. Yep.
Good stuff. Yeah.
I think, it seems like that has been a shift across a lot of different sports, that notion of working smarter, not harder, that you touched on. And I think the way I really liked what you described too, of like, I've heard it phrased as like, don't confuse activity with achievement, right? Like, just because you're
Right.
doing something doesn't necessarily mean you're getting better. And just how important that is for as a coach. It ties in so well to the focus that you talked about earlier. Hey, can we make sure that not only we're getting our reps in, but we're not just checking boxes, we're filling boxes. And in order to do that, we need full focus, we need the attitude, all those controllable things that you talked about earlier. So it ties in really nicely to that evolution you've described.
And the other thing I don't want to forget is rest and recovery.
Mm.
As a young coach, I never even cared or thought about rest and recovery, but I remember in 2004 coaching the Olympic team. For the first time, I had a biomechanist, I had an exercise physiologist, sports psychologist. I mean, I had all these people at my hands. And I remember the physiologists and the biomechanists, they wanted to see my practice plans for the summer leading up to the Olympic Games. And so what we decided is we're going to just take each day, and it's going to be either a light, medium, or hard practice. Okay, what we're going to be doing in a weight room, and I'm going to give them a 1 month snapshot of it. And I remember when I did it, and I handed it to them. They go, "You're going to kill them. You don't have enough rest and recovery." And so that's another thing that sometimes you're scared to take a day off, but sometimes that day off can make a huge difference, not just physically but mentally.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. This ties in. I kind of want to bring it back to you, but also maybe broadening this out to those now that you're leading and serving in the athletic department. We touched on earlier this sense of balance that you
Mm-hmm.
wanted athletes to find as they were pursuing excellence, and then how for you that mindset eventually you adopted as well. What advice would you give now to today's coach about how do you, how one can you, and two, how do you strike a sense of
Okay.
balance while you pursue excellence?
Great question. Um, Probably the hardest thing. I always thought if you're going to pursue excellence, you can't have balance. Um, and that was me. But on the other hand, you've got to look at the big picture of your longevity, and can you continue to go about. I think there's spurts that coaches go through where they have no balance, and there's times when you can't have balance, but there are times when you do. So let's go back to our statement: be where your feet are. Right? This is a good one. So when you're at work and you're on the field, you definitely need to be where your feet are. But when you're at home with your spouse having dinner, you need to be where your feet are too. And that's the balance type that I think anyone can achieve if they're aware of it. How many times did I go to dinner and I'm sitting there talking to my wife, and she goes, "Mike, I don't know why we're even doing this because you're still in the seventh inning, right?" And so I think that that's a huge thing that people can understand. It's not, you know, it's not circling in a kumbaya session and any of that, but it's being able to compartmentalize your days. And if you need to be somewhere, be there. And I say that even with these coaches, man, when you call a meeting with your players, then be there. You know, don't be on the phone. Don't be be where your feet are. And I think that's very powerful. And I think that you can achieve at any time. Um, when we talk balance to me about my life, I think there was some elements of it that were out of balance. you know, um, Out of balance meaning 99% of my life was softball or baseball and 1% with family. To me, that's another picture that you have to look at. And to me, I just felt like when I when I made time for my faith, which is very important to me, it made me a happier person. And a happier person becomes a more productive person. So I mean, it's not easy, but a lot of it is having awareness. Where am I? What do I need to do to change some things that might help me down the road? Because I didn't want to be a flash in the pan. I wanted to be successful for a long time. And that's the one thing that I realize is that I can't be just grinding and grinding and grinding, and you see it all the time. People burn out because they haven't understood the concept. Because you can be intense. I mean, I'm competitive and I'm going to give you everything I have, but I've learned how to do that in spurts and not the entire time. It might have, what might have helped me back then was when I was commuting for 21 years. I always had that downtime, sitting in a car by myself to decompress. Because one thing I learned about that time was it was interesting because as a young coach, I'd get after a little bit and I'd get after kids a little bit, and I just remember one time chewing my player's ass off, and I'm driving home and I get about halfway to Casa Grande. I go, why did I say that? That's not what I meant to say. So it taught me to make sure that you don't let your emotions stop.
Yeah.
You got to think through things.
For sure, for sure. I had there's another guest who coach that was on this show, and he talked about in his head, he's like, I didn't say this out loud, but I would say to pause, and I would remind myself before I speak, like just give me a moment to just kind of slow down, if you will. And sometimes you need that space,
Abs-
and it's so easy to just again because there's there's so many things on your plate as a coach. It's sometimes your mind doesn't really get space to slow down, if you will. So you have to create it. You have to deliberately create some time. And for you, it sounds like that car ride home was this space for you that over time you're like, oh, I can actually use this to my advantage, not only to be more reflective as a coach, but then to also create a better transition to being dad and being husband
right.
and so on at home.
And back then it was like I didn't really understand or didn't really think about the concept of being where your feet are. And then when I got in a situation where I'm 5 minutes from home, from work, that's when I really needed it, because you were having a harder time shutting things off. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think like the young coaches today, um, again, trying to navigate through all this NIL and transfer portal. And, I keep telling them that, unfortunately, the athlete that you're dealing with in this generation is disloyal. And you can see it every day. So that's another thing I think that they need to make sure. That's another reason why they need to build those strong relationships, because I don't think that all of them have been brought up in that arena.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned earlier for you the like the concept of it takes a village, right? And
Mhm.
you've already touched on a lot of different people that have been part of that village for you. The other question I'd be curious, like thinking about it for the current, like for current head, like coaches, head, assistant, whatever. Um, how important is it for them to have people in their life to, whether it's formally or informally, to kind of coach them and to support them?
Absolutely. I think it's. I mean, that's kind of what I feel I am right now with some of them was just personal coaches. Like Desiree, our AD. I'm a special advisor to her, and a lot of times it's just, hey, Mike, what do you think? And it's just getting another viewpoint. And I think young coaches today definitely need. I always had someone else outside of the coaching profession that was another set of eyes and ears for me. Because the one thing that I never wanted to do is I never wanted to change as a person. And I think that's one thing I'm proud of is I'm the same guy I was from in 1976 as I am today, you know. And I think part of that is having someone that kind of keeps you in check to say, hey, you know, what are you doing? You know. And so I think that's huge. And then I also think I like to cross train, shall I say, with other organizations, other people, business people. I mean, there's a lot you can learn about leadership with lots of different aspects in this world. It's not just coaching, and so I most certainly I think that's important, And I always had someone in my like George Young was a track guy, but a four-time Olympian, and the one thing that he stressed upon me was compete. Two things: compete and don't complain about what you don't have. Take what you have and do the best you can with it. You know, and those two things kind of stuck in my head all the time.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to be, mindful of your time, and I just have a couple of final questions. And this next one, it's honestly a little bit of a pivot from our conversation thus far, but I would be remiss, I think, if I didn't ask about it because I read somewhere that there was this legacy exercise that you would do with your players when they got to campus, and I was just I only got maybe the surface level look at that, but I was really curious to maybe hear a little bit more about what that looked like and how you felt like that benefited not just your players but your program.
Well, it's yeah. Let me kind of describe this. So while we were building our legacy in the '90s, um, that wasn't necessary because people came to Arizona for one reason, that was to win a national championship. The standards were set. There was a high level of accountability, and the culture that was built there was built by the players, not by me walking in and hanging up posters and saying this is what our culture is going to be. So in that regard, it was the reason why we were winning is because we had great athletes that were holding each other accountable, that loved one another and were great teammates. We got to a stage, and it was like 2000, after my 2008 Olympic career, probably 2010. I realized that the legacy of Arizona softball was swallowing people up. The generation I was coaching didn't want to hear about it. They wanted their own. And I understand that. But it got to a point where I'm going, you guys don't even appreciate the A that you're wearing. You don't appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears because you have to appreciate the people that come before you. Okay. So I had them do an exercise, and I was kind of felt like we were losing our identity of this is what we play for, not the name on the back, but the name on the front, right? So I just took their jerseys and gave them all blank jerseys, and they had to earn the opportunity to wear the A. And along with that was an opportunity for us to grow individually. and as a team. And so we did a ceremony every week, and we had our pillars that, whether it was being competitive, discipline, hard work. There was 5 or 6 pillars that they would judge each other on. One was being a good teammate. And so after every week we would do a vote. They would actually evaluate every one of their teammates, and then whoever got 95% of the votes from their team, they earned the A. They get to wear it. And what was powerful about that was we would have a little ceremony to give them their gear. We would allow the people to talk about them. So they, for the first time, they're going to hear about, this is why I got voted, because I'm a great teammate. I work hard. I hold everyone accountable. And this went on from like September. The last one that we gave was like January. And it was some kids that no one ever told them that they had deficiencies. And most of the time, the deficiency is usually being selfish, not holding each other accountable, and not being a good teammate. And so we went through that whole exercise. Pretty soon, everyone had earned their A, but they had all grown a little bit individually because now they kind of knew where their deficiencies were. And that team became very strong. And so we kept using it for numerous years. Today, we don't, because I think we're in another generation that at least is in awe of the heritage. They appreciate it, and so it's it was kind of used for a moment there in time when we were kind of maybe recruiting the wrong person, the wrong people, maybe a different generation, I don't know.
Yeah, everything in seasons. There was a stretch there where that made sense
Yeah,
and that was effective and it worked, and now it's a new season and
right,
there's something different. So no, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's cool to hear how you connected that individual purpose with the team and then create an opportunity for them to really just earn and be kind of become officially a part of
right.
the such a rich tradition that was built there. Um, so with that, that kind of brings me my very last question is one that I actually like to ask everybody. But I'm curious, and this can be as it relates to coaching and softball, or it can be in whatever space of your life you'd like it to be. But Mike, what's one thing that you're proud of that maybe you don't normally get an excuse to talk about or to share?
Hmm, it's a good one. Um, I guess just being the same person I've always been. I go to my high school reunion and they go, "Man, it's like you haven't left." And to me, that's a compliment because I think sometimes with success, people change, and sometimes they can change for the good, sometimes they can change for the bad. But I've always tried to be consistent. That's kind of my life. I think everything else I've had opportunities to talk about because I do a lot of speaking about my journey and but yeah, I think that and just the hard times of not being a good dad all the time. you know that I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's it's not funny, but this is the truth. But 2 years ago, I was the father of the year, here in Tucson, and when I remember when they called me up and said you've been nominated for as father of the year, I'm kind of going, boy, if you really knew me,
Mhm.
there was a lot of work in progress there. And so that's something that I don't talk a lot about, but and it still eats at me sometimes. It's like I wish I could have woken up a little bit sooner to spend more quality time, but that's kind of the way the career happened, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think though to maybe bring it full circle is, we've hit on it a few times, this idea of being where your feet are, and getting to this point later in your coaching career where that became not just a nice thought, but it was something that was actually like lived and practiced, if you will.
Yeah.
And now to kind of hear you talk about that now in your post coaching career, and not just in stills now supporting other coaches, but even within your family and all the other different relationships in your life that are important to you. So I appreciate your honesty with that, and more than anything, I'm just really grateful for you taking the last hour plus to
Sure.
to share, and I wrote down several things. This is another episode where I feel like I'm definitely gonna have to re-listen, because I know
Uh,
I missed some things that I would have loved to
yeah.
double tap on. But I just want to thank you again.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely appreciate the opportunity, and I I watch the Diamondbacks as much as I can here, except where they're blacked out, which really kind of upsets me, but it
Yeah,
happens. But Torey
yeah,
Lavello, I mean, I know his upbringing. I was inducted into the Italian American Baseball um, Hall of Fame a few years ago, and then we inducted Torey 2 years ago. So I was back in New York
okay.
City for that, and
Oh, great.
yeah, so he's a good guy, and I know he's spent some time with Tommy Lloyd, our basketball coach, and but yeah, he gets it. I mean, I watch him operate and listen to his comments. And
Yep.
the other guy that I can tell you that I'm so proud of is Tito Francona. You know, Terry Francona was a player here at Arizona, and we have become good friends and have stayed good friends. And he's just amazing what he does.
Yeah.
Because even like right now, they say the Cincinnati Reds has the Francona effect, whatever that
Yeah.
is. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about some people that not only have been successful, as some like to say, when it comes to results and all that, but more so, maybe more importantly, just the values that those guys live by,
Right.
and how they show up and how they lead and how they make those that they lead feel like that. It ties in so well. I can't help but think of your three C's earlier: the competence, consistency, and caring. And I think those guys certainly are models of that as well.
And the last thing I'll say is I love it when people tell me that, you were not only a great coach, but you're an even better person.
Mm,
And to me, that is a compliment at the end of the day. Because there's a
that's
lot
that's
of a
a
lot of successful coaches out there that I wouldn't want to spend much time with, but
yeah,
as people. So,
yeah, no,
Zach, thank you so much.
but yeah.
Maybe someday I'll
Thank you,
get up.
Mike.
I'll be up at the park and I'll look you up.